On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice podcast. I'm your host, Cody Felger. Joining me again, our friend, basically your other co-host, Andrew Thomason. Andrew, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very well, Cody. Doing very well. How are you?
Hey, I am doing well as well. It's kind of funny. Doing well as well, though. I'm doing good. Life is good right now, man, and wanting to keep on cranking out these podcasts. So the point of this podcast, the topic of this podcast, we're going to do something a little bit different. So we're going to look at three potential Colts going into 2020 who are going to be guys who are maybe a little bit under the radar, right? Guys that don't have a ton of expectations tied to their name in 2020, but guys that we think can be major overachievers in 2020. And now just a little bit of a prerequisite here. So these guys we think will undoubtedly or very likely to make the final 53-man roster. So we think these are guys that could potentially, if the expectation, the bar is set here, we think they could raise that bar in 2020 and go past the expectations that are placed on them by fans and by media and by everybody. And so we have three guys. Andrew and I came up with our own lists. And so, Andrew, who is your number three guy that you think could be a guy who could potentially, be a guy that could really surprise a lot of people here in 2020?
That may shock a lot of people, Cody, but I'm going with Phillip Rivers. And I'm going with Phillip Rivers for this reason. I think a lot of people tend to forget that Rivers just 2 seasons ago, or what will be 2 seasons ago here come August, was removed from, leading the Chargers to a 12-4 record. He completed over 68% of his passes, had over 4,300 yards, averaged 8.5 yards per pass, had 32 passing touchdowns, and only 12 interceptions. And so, he played for a 37-year-old quarterback at the time. Tremendous football. I know people are concerned about the 20 interceptions that he threw last season, and rightfully so, especially since a majority of those came when the game was on the line. However, I will say I did my fair share of film study. I studied all of his interceptions, and in my personal opinion, most of those interceptions came from interior pressure from when he was in the pocket. And the good news about that is that he probably won't have much of that since he has Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, and Mark Glowinski up front to protect that interior. So I think Phillip Rivers is certainly a player to keep your eye on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, starting out strong there. I know it's a guy that very polarizing for Colts fans, to say the least. Some are in love with it, and some are absolutely hate it off of, obviously the season that Rivers had last year. So I agree with you there. I think it's potentially a guy who not a ton of expectations. Some people are like he's going to be, revert back to 2018 Phillip Rivers. Some are like he's going to be worse than Jacoby Brissett was last year. And so I think 3 is a good spot. It's not too crazy, but it's also, there's some people who don't have a lot of high expectations for Phillip Rivers. So I like that one. My number 3 is going to be a guy who was drafted last year. He played in all 16 games, but he didn't start a game. He had 2.5 sacks from that defensive end position. He actually, when he was drafted, he was projected to play some Sam linebacker, but he ended up just, the Colts just wanted him to play defensive end strictly. And so that's what he did last year. He had 2.5 sacks. He had 3 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits. And this guy's been Banogu, second-round pick last year. And he's a guy that showed some flashes. He kind of reminded me, his rookie season kind of in certain ways reminded me of Kamoko Touré's rookie season. And we know last year, before he went down with that injury, Touré was really turning it on and really felt like there were some things that were clicking in him, and certainly looks to continue to project very well. But I think a guy like Banogu is a guy. You mentioned Toure, who's getting a lot of hype. Justin Houston, who already has a lot of hype. DeForest Buckner. I think this is a perfect opportunity for a guy like Ben Banogu. That defensive end position opposite Justin Houston, it's open, right? It's available, and I think this could potentially be the chance that Ben Banogu is looking for to potentially break out and really exceed a lot of expectations. Not a ton of expectations on him right now. But yeah, Ben Banogu is my guy here at number 3. What do you think about this guy, Andrew?
I certainly think Banogu is somebody that could surprise a lot of people. As you mentioned, Cody, he showed several flashes that, as you said, reminded you of Kamoka Toure a little bit during his rookie season. And like you said, most importantly, that defensive end spot opposite Justin Houston is wide open. And so, may the best defensive end win, I suppose. And I think Ben Banogu has a great chance to, as you mentioned, claim that defensive end spot.
Yep. And then moving on to your number 2, who do you have here, Andrew, for your number 2 guy?
I've got Khari Willis as my number 2 guy. And, I mean, he came in as a rookie and pretty much earned within the first few weeks. By week 3, I believe, he earned that starting strong safety role. And he rightfully earned that because he had, he played pretty well. He had 71 combined tackles, 18 assisted. He had no interceptions, but there's one game, Cody, that really stands out to me, and that's the game against Kansas City. On Sunday Night Football, on the biggest stage perhaps in the entire NFL, when your secondary is depleted with injuries and you have a rookie in Khari Willis, who, mind you, the Colts traded up for, something we didn't really see too much of Chris Ballard prior to that in that draft. He came in and played well. He was a tackling machine. The Colts put him in the box to help stop the run on multiple times, and he did pretty well at that too. And so I think Khari Willis is certainly somebody to keep your eye on going into 2020.
Yeah, Khari Willis is a guy that I really like. And when the Colts drafted him in the 4th round, I mean, I think it was fair to say the expectation for a lot of people was, he's probably not going to see the field a lot in 2020. He's probably going to be more of a special teams player. Maybe eventually he works his way into the starting role, and maybe at the end of the year. But I could, and nobody really could have projected the kind of season that Khari Willis would have. I mean, you mentioned it, right from the start, taking away that strong safety position from Clayton Geathers and never relinquishing it, and not just holding down that position, but thriving in that position, being one of the best rookies at his position and arguably one of the best defensive rookies in the league last year. Certainly a guy for Khari Willis that I think is not getting a lot of hype, not enough hype. Certainly, because of how great he was last year. And, I guess it's just because of the overshadowing of some of the other impact players the Colts have added on that defensive side. DeForest Buckner, potentially Xavier Rhodes, and some other guys. I think we can potentially kind of forget about a guy like Khari Willis, who's really, shown, since he's been drafted, that he's a guy that the Colts can rely on potentially to be their strong safety of the future. So really like that one as well. For me, speaking of the secondary, my number 2 guy is actually a guy that was drafted this year, and this may surprise some people. But I'm going to go with cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. He was the guy that was drafted in the 6th round this year, picked 211. Actually, was the Colts traded away Quincy Wilson, former 2nd-round pick in 2017, and with that pick, they selected Rodgers. Now, Rodgers and Wilson are completely different body types. Wilson's over 6 foot, 200 pounds. Rodgers is 5'10", 170. He's a guy that, on the surface, you kind of would be asking, well, is this a downgrade? But I don't think so. And I'll tell you why I don't think so. First off, the slot is huge for what this defense does. We know Kenny Moore is a huge guy in the slot. He's one of the best slot corners, if not the best slot corner in the league. But, injuries happen in this league. And we saw last year when Kenny Moore got banged up for a couple games, the Colts defense suffered in the slot. I mean, they had nobody that even sniffed the kind of production they got from Kenny Moore there in the slot. And so throwing a guy like Isaiah Rodgers, who can play the slot, right? He's got that size to be a good slot corner, but he can also play outside. He played a lot outside at UMass. And also another thing that he adds, Quincy Wilson did not add, was his special teams ability. I think that's something that can't be understated. I feel like a lot of people don't really think about how valuable special teams are, but throwing a guy like Rodgers, he ran 4.28 40. I mean, he's a burner type of guy, and he also returned some punts and kicks at UMass, and so he returned 99 kickoffs, averaged about 23.6 yards. He returned 21 punts, averaged about 7.4 and a touchdown. He set UMass's school records for career kick returns, yards, and interceptions returned for a touchdown. And so I just think he's a guy that a lot of people, when they think of 6th-round picks, they think of guys that probably aren't going to make the roster, probably are not going to contribute right away. But I think he's a guy that could potentially contribute, maybe not on the defense right away, but on special teams, certainly in the return game, especially since the Colts decided to after Rodgers, who's done a lot of the returning for the Colts in the last few seasons. And so what do you think here, Andrew, about my pick here of Isaiah Rodgers?
I certainly think Rodgers is interesting, as you mentioned, Cody, just for all the amount of versatility that he brings with his special teams play. The 4.2 speed is something that you mentioned to keep your eye on. And then, as you mentioned, the importance of the slot. When Kenny Moore went down, the Colts didn't really have anybody that, like you said, came close to the production that Kenny Moore had. And so that was an important position for the Colts to fill. And I think they went out and they got Rodgers possibly for that reason. I think he's, as you mentioned, able to maybe compete with TJ Carey, who they also brought in to possibly play the slot. And I think he's got a good chance to earn that backup role.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty. So our number one picks here. Andrew, for your number one guy you think is going to break out and exceed expectations, who is he?
He's a guy that's been getting a little bit more attention as of late, Cody. And it's somebody that, honestly, when he was drafted in the 3rd round out of Stanford in last year's draft, or not last year's, but 2018 or 2019, pardon me, I didn't really expect too much from him, but it's Bobby Okereke. And Okereke, I think, came in as a rookie and played tremendous football, played right alongside Anthony Walker, and arguably had a slightly better season than Walker. He had 65 combined tackles, 17 assisted, and a sack, which I believe came in the Tennessee game at home last season. Okereke's a guy that certainly showed that he has the capability of earning a starting role in that linebacking corps. And I think this season, honestly, Okereke, Walker, and Leonard could create one of the best linebacking tandems in the entire National Football League. Just because a player is drafted in the mid to late rounds, as we've seen with Chris Ballard and Anthony Walker and Bobby Okereke primarily, doesn't mean that they can't come in and perform and play well and earn a starting role. And Okereke, I think, exceeded expectations last year, and I think he's got a really good chance to do it again this year.
Yeah, you mentioned it. He was a breakout guy last year. I think he was kind of overshadowed a little bit by, just Corey Willis coming onto the scene. But I think, he's certainly a guy that, at least from an athletic standpoint, he's more athletic than Anthony Walker. He's a guy that just overall, he has a lot of those Darius Leonard type traits that you look for. I know that his comp coming out of Stanford was actually Darius Leonard. Now, obviously, Darius Leonard's a little more athletic and everything like that. But, he's just a guy that he gets it, right? He wasn't afraid to go in there as a rookie. I mean, he was so good. The Colts felt like they could not keep him off the field, right? They basically changed their Sam linebacker position, the nature of that position, to get Okereke on the field with Walker and Leonard. I mean, that just shows you how good he was last year. And he was only a rookie. He's going to get better, right? He's going to get better as he continues to acclimate to the NFL level, as he continues to get his body right. He's just going to be – he's one of those guys, along with Corey Willis, who I think really, fantastic home run guys in the mid-rounds. So I certainly think he's a guy that is not getting enough hype. He's getting a little bit more, like you mentioned, but I think he deserves more hype than he's getting, because I think he's coming and he's going to come hard. And a lot of people are going to be surprised when he's one of the best linebackers in the league in the next few years. Okay, so moving on to my number one guy. So I thought about this for a while, and I know Derek's going to like this guy for me because I feel like he's been disrespected a lot. he's kind of been forgotten and written off. And that guy for me is definitely Paris Campbell. I mean, he's a guy that was drafted last year in the second round. He only played in 7 games, right? He had a couple different injuries. I know he broke his hand after that Pittsburgh game. He had another couple injuries. He got injured in training camp. Just a freak year for Paris Campbell with those injuries. But the reason why I say he's so underrated and why I think he can potentially break out is first the addition of Phillip Rivers, who we know is an automatic upgrade in terms of how much it helps your receivers and everybody on that offense. And then second, I just think, he's got to get his body right. And I think he knows that, and he's going to continue to do that. And also, he has now a guy that the Colts drafted in Michael Pittman to kind of take the pressure off of him a little bit. Right now, the Colts have T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, Zach Pascal, who kind of broke out last year, and then Paris Campbell. I mean, he's a guy that when he gets the ball in the Pittsburgh game, he had over 100 scrimmage yards when they got the ball in his hand. Now, there are certain things he's going to have to clean up, undoubtedly, but I think he's a guy that a lot of people are forgetting about and kind of writing off. And I think that's not a good idea to do because I am a big Paris Campbell guy. I believe that he's a guy that just adds another element, a dynamic element that your offense has been missing for so long. But the question will be, can he play most of the games? Can he play 14, 15 games? And, will you get him the ball and give him, similar to Nyheim Hines? We feel like Nyheim Hines has been really underused since he's been with the Colts. Can you just give those guys more chances to just make plays? They have those speed. They have that speed. The Colts drafted him, the fastest receiver in that draft. They drafted Nyheim Hines, the fastest running back in that draft. Now I think it's time to just see what you got with those guys. Let them make a play. Don't make Phillip Rivers throw the ball down the field 40, 50 yards all the time, right? And do more of those short passes. And I think that's what Phillip Rivers excels in. And I think that's exactly why I think Paris Campbell is primed for a bigger year than a lot of people are expecting. So that's my take there on Paris Campbell. Andrew, did you have any thoughts before we wrap it up here on Paris Campbell?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Cody, with Campbell. I think he's an excellent player. Obviously, you mentioned his season, his rookie season was unfortunately cut short due to injuries. I think he's a guy that, as you mentioned, brings a unique kind of explosiveness to an offense. And when you have an offense that's as uniquely ran as Frank Reich and Nick Sirianni's is, and you have a guy in Phillip Rivers who had a guy in Travis Benjamin who could maybe be a player comparison to Paris Campbell. Some may argue Campbell's a bit faster and a bit more explosive, but Travis Benjamin, played quite well in Los Angeles and was quite the security blanket at times for Phillip Rivers. And I think, as you mentioned, if Campbell can stay healthy and play all 16 games, I think he's going to be quite the weapon for Phillip Rivers in this offense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, that'll do it for this podcast, guys. Thanks for listening, as always. We really appreciate all the support you guys give us. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment on who you think. If there are any players that we missed that you think could potentially surprise a lot of people in 2020, let us know in the comments. But for Andrew and myself, thank you guys. And as always, go Colts.